The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Cathedral, casting rainbow prisms across marble floors that had witnessed countless unions. But for Isabella Martinez, 24 and trembling in her ivory silk gown, this felt more like a funeral than a celebration. Her reflection in the bridal suite mirror revealed hollow eyes rimmed with tears she'd been fighting since dawn. "You look beautiful, Mija," her mother whispered, adjusting the cathedral-length veil that had belonged to 3 generations of Martinez women. But Isabella's hands shook as she clutched her bouquet of white roses, their thorns pricking through her satin gloves like tiny reminders of the pain she was about to commit to. The wedding march would begin in 30 minutes. Downstairs, 300 guests waited to witness her marriage to Richard Blackwell, heir to the Blackwell pharmaceutical fortune. A union arranged not by love, but by desperation. Her father's construction company teetered on bankruptcy, and Richard's proposal had come with a merger agreement that would save her family's legacy. But as Isabella stared at herself in the mirror, she saw not a bride, but a prisoner in white lace. The diamond choker around her neck felt like a chain, the engagement ring on her finger heavy as a shackle. Somewhere across the city, Alexander Romano was probably closing another billion-dollar deal, unaware that the woman who had haunted his dreams for 2 years was about to bind herself to another man forever. The door opened, and her maid of honor appeared with a forced smile, announcing it was time. Isabella's tears fell freely now, each drop a silent plea for a miracle that seemed impossible. 40 floors above Manhattan's bustling streets, Alexander Romano stood in his corner office, staring out at the city that had witnessed his meteoric rise from orphaned street kid to tech billionaire. At 32, he commanded an empire worth $20 billion, but today, wealth felt meaningless. His phone buzzed with congratulations from business associates who'd seen the society pages, all commenting on Isabella's wedding to Richard Blackwell. The newspapers lay scattered across his mahogany desk, each featuring photos of the happy couple at various pre-wedding events. Isabella's smile looked forced in every image, her eyes lacking the spark he remembered from their brief but intense relationship 2 years ago. He'd met her at a charity gala, been captivated by her intelligence and genuine heart, but his own insecurities about their different worlds had driven him to end things abruptly. "You deserve someone from your own circle," he'd told her that last night, watching her face crumble. It was the biggest lie he'd ever told, born from fear that a girl from a traditional Mexican-American family could never truly love someone who'd grown up in foster homes and juvenile detention centers. Now, watching her prepare to marry a man everyone knew she didn't love, Alexander realized his cowardice had destroyed both their chances at happiness. His assistant knocked, reminding him of the board meeting scheduled for this afternoon. But Alexander's mind was elsewhere, calculating drive times to St. Catherine's Cathedral. He'd built his fortune on calculated risks, on seeing opportunities others missed and acting decisively. Perhaps it was time to apply those same principles to matters of the heart. The wedding was set to begin in 2 hours. Traffic permitting, he could make it in 90 minutes. In the groom's preparation room at St. Catherine's Cathedral, Richard Blackwell adjusted his platinum cufflinks with the satisfaction of a man about to close his most important deal. At 29, he possessed the calculated charm that came with old money and older prejudices. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, his custom Armani tuxedo fitted to showcase his athletic frame, maintained by personal trainers and tennis coaches. "Nervous?" asked his best man, Thomas Whitmore III, heir to another pharmaceutical dynasty. "About what?" "This is a business transaction, nothing more," Richard replied, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "Isabella's family gets the capital injection they need. I get access to the Latino market through their construction connections." And my father finally stops questioning my commitment to the family legacy. The truth was darker than Richard cared to admit even to himself. He'd specifically chosen Isabella precisely because she was vulnerable, her family's financial crisis making her grateful and compliant. He'd researched Alexander Romano thoroughly, knew about their past relationship, and had timed his proposal perfectly to catch her at her lowest emotional point. Plus, Richard continued, straightening his white bow tie, she's beautiful enough to be an asset at political fundraisers and board meetings. Exotic, but not too ethnic, if you know what I mean. Thomas chuckled, but there was something unsettling in Richard's cold calculation. This wasn't just about marriage or money, it was about possession, about proving he could take whatever he wanted. He'd heard the whispers about Isabella's tears during the engagement party, seen the way she flinched when he touched her, but her resistance only fueled his determination to own her completely. The ceremony would begin in 20 minutes, and then Isabella Martinez would become his wife, his property, his trophy. Nothing could stop that now. The cathedral's massive wooden doors opened to reveal a scene of breathtaking elegance. White roses and baby's breath adorned every pew, their fragrance mixing with the scent of ancient stone and burning candles. The morning light streaming through stained glass windows painted everything in ethereal hues of blue and gold, creating an atmosphere that should have been magical but felt oppressive to the bride waiting in the vestibule. Isabella's father, Miguel Martinez, took her arm with hands that trembled slightly from both emotion and the weight of financial ruin. His construction company had been his life's work, built from nothing when he'd immigrated from Mexico 40 years ago. Now it hung by a thread, saved only by his daughter's sacrifice. "Are you sure about this, mija?" he whispered in Spanish, his weathered face etched with guilt. "There has to be another way." But Isabella had already made her choice. She'd seen the bills piling up, watched her mother selling jewelry piece by piece, witnessed her father's pride crumble as banks refused loan extensions. Richard's marriage proposal had come with a dowry in reverse, a merger that would inject $20 million into Martinez Construction and secure jobs for 200 employees. The wedding march began, its familiar notes echoing off cathedral walls like a funeral dirge. Isabella's bridesmaids, dressed in soft lavender, walked ahead with forced smiles, their eyes reflecting the same concern that had shadowed the entire engagement period. At the altar, Richard waited with the confidence of a man about to acquire his most prized possession. With each step down the aisle, Isabella felt pieces of her soul breaking away. The 300 guests turned to watch her procession, their faces blurring through her tears. Somewhere in the crowd sat classmates from Colombia, business associates of both families, and society reporters documenting what they'd call the wedding of the year. But to Isabella, it felt like walking to her execution. At the altar, Father McKenna opened his worn Bible and began the ceremony that would bind Isabella to a life she'd never chosen. The ancient words echoed through the cathedral like incantations, each phrase another link in the chain being forged around her heart. Richard stood beside her with perfect posture, his hand possessive on her elbow, his smile never reaching his cold blue eyes. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Richard Hamilton Blackwell III and Isabella Elena Martinez." The priest's voice seemed to come from underwater as Isabella fought waves of panic. Her bouquet trembled in her white-gloved hands, the rose's perfume suddenly cloying and overwhelming. Behind her, she could hear her mother crying tears of what others might mistake for joy, but Isabella knew were tears of shared grief. Richard's business associates filled the front pews, their faces reflecting satisfaction at a deal well struck. The Blackwell family pharmaceutical empire was expanding into new markets, and Isabella was simply the key that opened those doors. Her own extended family looked uncomfortable in their rented formal wear, sensing the transactional nature of this union, but powerless to stop it. If anyone can show just cause why these two should not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional words hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as she prayed for intervention, for someone to stand up and declare this wedding a sham. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity, broken only by the soft rustling of fabric and the distant sound of New York traffic beyond the cathedral walls. Father McKenna was about to continue when the massive wooden doors at the back of the cathedral burst open with a crash that echoed like thunder through the sacred space. Alexander Romano stood silhouetted in the doorway like a figure from a Renaissance painting, his black hair disheveled from running, his usually perfect Armani suit wrinkled from his desperate rush across the city. Behind him, New York's midday sun created a halo effect that made him appear almost supernatural against the cathedral's ancient stones. Every head turned as he strode down the aisle with the confidence that had built a tech empire from nothing. His dark eyes, usually so controlled during business negotiations, burned with an intensity that made several guests gasp audibly. He'd discarded his tie somewhere between the parking lot and the cathedral doors, his white shirt open at the collar, revealing the passion he'd suppressed for 2 long years. "Isabella," he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "Don't do this. You don't belong with him." The congregation erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations. Richard's face transformed from confusion to fury as he recognized the man who'd haunted his careful plans. At the altar, Father McKenna clutched his Bible with uncertain hands, clearly unprepared for such drama in his usually staid ceremonies. "Security!" Richard barked, but Alexander was already halfway down the aisle, his eyes locked on Isabella's tear-streaked face. "You bastard!" Richard hissed, stepping protectively or possessively in front of his bride. "This is my wedding. You have no right to be here." But Alexander ignored him completely, his attention focused entirely on the woman in white who stood frozen between her past and her future. The cathedral had gone silent except for the sound of his footsteps on marble and the rapid beating of 300 hearts, witnessing the most dramatic scene of their lives. "Isabella, please," Alexander said, his voice softer now but still carrying to every corner of the sacred space. "Look at me and tell me you love him. If you can do that, I'll leave and never bother you again." Isabella's world tilted as she stared into the dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for 2 years. Alexander stood before her like a vision, real and solid and impossibly beautiful, making her heart race in a way Richard never had. The cathedral around them seemed to fade away until only the two of them existed in their bubble of suspended time and infinite possibility. "How dare you!" Richard's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "This is our wedding day. Security, remove this man immediately." But no security appeared. Alexander had learned long ago that confidence and authority could open any door, bypass any obstacle. He stepped closer to Isabella, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne, see the desperation in his usually controlled features. "2 years ago, I was a fool," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent cathedral. "I thought I wasn't good enough for you, that your family would never accept someone like me. So I walked away from the best thing that ever happened to me." Isabella's tears flowed freely now, her carefully applied makeup creating delicate streams down her cheeks. Her mother's rosary, woven through her bouquet, seemed to burn against her palm as she clutched the flowers like a lifeline. "Alexander, you can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can and I will," he interrupted, his intensity making several guests lean forward in their pews. "I've spent 2 years building an empire, telling myself it was enough. But success means nothing without someone to share it with, without you." Richard grabbed Isabella's arm, his grip tight enough to leave bruises beneath her white gloves. "She's marrying me. We have a contract, obligations. I'm not talking to you," Alexander said, without even glancing at the groom. "Isabella, do you remember what you told me that night at the charity gala? You said love wasn't about deserving someone, it was about being brave enough to choose them every day." The cathedral held its collective breath. "Choose?" Richard's laugh was harsh and bitter as he tightened his grip on Isabella's arm. "She doesn't have a choice. Her family's company will collapse without this marriage. Her father will lose everything he's worked for. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. That's the reality, Romano, not your romantic delusions." Isabella flinched at the cruel words. But they were true. The merger papers were already drawn up, contingent on the marriage ceremony's completion. Her family's construction company hung by a thread, and this wedding was the only thing keeping it from bankruptcy. "Is that what this is about?" Alexander's eyes flashed with understanding and fury. "Money, debt." He pulled out his phone with quick, decisive movements. "My assistant is transferring $50 million to Martinez Construction as we speak. Consider the debt paid in full, with enough left over for expansion." Gasps echoed through the cathedral as guests realized they were witnessing not just a romantic gesture, but a financial coup that would reshape several business empires. Richard's face went pale as his carefully constructed plans crumbled before his eyes. "You can't just," Richard sputtered, but Alexander cut him off. "I can, and I did. Isabella, you're free. No contracts, no obligations, no family pressure. The only question left is what your heart wants." Miguel Martinez stood up from the front pew, his weathered face streaming with tears. "Mija, is this true? Are we really free?" Alexander nodded to Isabella's father. "Completely free, sir. With my deepest apologies for not doing this 2 years ago, when I should have fought for your daughter instead of walking away like a coward." Isabella stared at Alexander in shock, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. In the span of 5 minutes, he'd not only declared his love, but eliminated every obstacle that had forced her toward this unwanted marriage. The white roses in her bouquet trembled as her hands shook with emotion. Richard's grip on her arm became painful. "This doesn't change anything. We're already at the altar. The ceremony continues." Isabella looked between the two men who represented completely different futures. Richard, with his blonde perfection and cold calculation, embodied security and social status, but offered nothing of the heart. Alexander, dark and passionate and flawed, represented risk and authentic love, and the kind of life she dreamed of before duty had trapped her in this cathedral. "Let go of her," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet as he noticed Richard's punishing grip on Isabella's arm. "She's my fiancée," Richard snapped back. "This is our wedding day. Some dramatic gesture and blood money doesn't change the fact that she said yes to me." "Did she?" Alexander stepped closer, his presence commanding despite being surrounded by Richard's allies. "Isabella, did you say yes because you wanted to marry him, or because you felt you had no other choice?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and inescapable. Isabella could feel 300 pairs of eyes on her, waiting for her answer. Her mother's rosary cut into her palm as she gripped her bouquet tighter, drawing strength from generations of strong women who had faced impossible choices. She began, then stopped. Her voice, when she found it again, was stronger. "I said yes because my family needed me to, because I thought love was a luxury I couldn't afford, because I believed duty was more important than happiness." Richard's face darkened. "And it is. Grow up, Isabella. Love is a fairy tale. This is real life, with real consequences." "No," Isabella said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "This isn't real life. This is fear. This is settling. This is choosing safety over the chance to be truly alive. She turned to face the congregation, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. I'm sorry, I can't do this. I won't marry someone I don't love just because it seems like the responsible choice. The cathedral erupted in shocked murmurs as Isabella began pulling off her engagement ring. Block 10. Breaking free. The diamond engagement ring slipped from Isabella's finger like a chain being broken, its facets catching the cathedral light one last time before she placed it firmly in Richard's palm. The symbolism was unmistakable. She was choosing freedom over security, love over duty, authentic happiness over societal expectations. You'll regret this, Richard hissed, his perfect composure finally cracking. Without me, you're nothing. A construction worker's daughter with delusions of grandeur. You think this tech billionaire will actually marry you. You're just a novelty to him, an exotic distraction. Alexander stepped forward, his face dark with anger. Watch your mouth, Blackwell, and consider our business relationship permanently terminated. I'll be pulling all Romano tech contracts from Blackwell Pharmaceuticals, effective immediately. The threat hit its mark. Richard's pharmaceutical company had been counting on several major deals with Romano Tech to boost their quarterly earnings. The loss would cost them millions and likely trigger a significant stock drop. Isabella began removing her veil, the gossamer fabric that had belonged to 3 generations of Martinez women now feeling like a shroud she needed to escape. Her mother gasped from the front pew, but when Isabella caught her eye, she saw not disappointment, but relief. Perhaps Maria Martinez had always known her daughter was making a terrible mistake. Mija, her father called out, his voice thick with emotion. Are you sure? Isabella looked at Miguel Martinez, the man who had sacrificed everything to give his family a better life in America, and saw not pressure, but love. He wanted her happiness more than any business deal, even if it had taken him until this moment to realize it. I'm sure, Papa, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent cathedral. For the first time in months, I'm completely sure. She turned to face Alexander, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cathedral, full of witnesses, faded away until only the 2 of them existed in their bubble of possibility and hope. Block 11. Love declared. Alexander took Isabella's hands in his, her white gloves soft against his calloused palms. The contrast told the story of their different worlds, her privileged upbringing versus his street-smart rise from nothing, but also their perfect complementarity. Where she was gentle, he was strong. Where he was rough, she was refined. Together, they created something beautiful and complete. Isabella, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral, but spoken as intimately as if they were alone. 2 years ago, I walked away because I thought love meant protecting you from my world. I was wrong. Love means being brave enough to build a new world together. Tears streamed down her face as she listened to the words she'd dreamed of hearing. The cathedral around them seemed to hold its breath. 300 wedding guests becoming witnesses to something far more authentic than the ceremony they'd originally come to see. I don't need you to be perfect, she whispered, her voice somehow carrying in the acoustic perfection of the ancient space. I just need you to be real, to choose me not because it makes sense on paper, but because you can't imagine living without me. Then marry me, Alexander said, dropping to one knee right there at the altar where she'd been about to bind herself to another man. Not because of contracts or mergers or family expectations. Marry me because we choose each other, every day, against all odds. The congregation gasped as he pulled out a simple platinum band, not the ostentatious diamond Richard had insisted upon, but a clean, elegant circle that spoke of permanence rather than possession. This is insane, Richard sputtered from behind them. You can't just steal my bride and propose at my own wedding. But Isabella and Alexander only had eyes for each other. She looked down at the man who had built an empire from nothing, who had crossed the city to fight for her, who was offering not just his wealth, but his heart. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Block 12. A new beginning. Father McKenna cleared his throat, his weathered face showing the confusion of a priest who had never encountered such dramatic circumstances in 40 years of conducting wedding ceremonies. The ancient cathedral had witnessed countless unions, but none quite like this, a bride literally choosing a different groom at the altar. "Well," he said, his Irish accent thick with bewilderment, "this is certainly irregular. But if the young lady wishes to marry Mr. Romano instead—" "Absolutely not," Richard's voice echoed off the stone walls. "This is my wedding. I have contracts, agreements, hundreds of guests who came here to witness my marriage to Isabella." But the guests were already choosing sides. Many who knew Isabella personally were smiling through their tears, recognizing that they were witnessing true love triumph over social expectation. Others, particularly Richard's business associates, looked uncomfortable as they calculated the financial implications of this dramatic reversal. Alexander stood and slipped the simple platinum band onto Isabella's finger, where it caught the light with understated elegance. The contrast with Richard's ostentatious diamond couldn't have been more stark. One ring spoke of possession, the other of partnership. "If Father McKenna is willing," Alexander said, "and if these witnesses can stay a bit longer, I'd be honored to marry Isabella right here, right now." Isabella's mother stood up from the front pew, her face radiant through her tears. "Mija, if this is what your heart wants, then this is what we want for you." Miguel Martinez joined his wife, extending his hand to Alexander. "You saved my company. But more importantly, you saved my daughter from a marriage that would have destroyed her spirit. You have my blessing and my gratitude." The cathedral began to buzz with excitement as guests realized they were about to witness an unprecedented double ceremony, or rather, the world's most dramatic wedding do-over. "Then let's begin again," Father McKenna said with a growing smile. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Alexander Romano and Isabella Martinez." Block 13, Forever begins. Now 6 months later, Isabella Romano stood on the terrace of their penthouse apartment, watching the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of gold and crimson. The city spread out below them like a promise, full of possibility, challenge, and dreams waiting to be fulfilled. She wore a simple sundress instead of designer gowns, her feet bare against the warm stone, her hair loose in the evening breeze. Alexander emerged from his home office, having just closed a deal that would bring internet access to underserved communities across Latin America. Success meant something different now, not just personal achievement, but the ability to lift others up along the way. Isabella's influence had shown him that wealth was only meaningful when shared. "How was the site visit today?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Isabella leaned back against his chest, smiling at the memory. Martinez Construction, now financially stable and rapidly expanding, was breaking ground on their largest affordable housing project yet. Her father's company was building homes that working families could actually afford, funded by a foundation she and Alexander had established together. "Perfect," she said. 60 families will have keys to their new homes by Christmas." Their wedding had made headlines for weeks, not just because of the drama, but because of what came after. Instead of a traditional honeymoon, they'd spent 2 weeks in Mexico, visiting the village where her grandparents had been born and establishing a scholarship fund for students pursuing engineering and technology degrees. The cathedral wedding had been annulled due to non-completion, and they'd married 3 days later in a simple ceremony in Central Park, surrounded by family and close friends. No business associates, no society reporters, just the people who loved them. Richard Blackwell had never recovered from the public humiliation. His pharmaceutical company's stock had plummeted when Romano Tech pulled their contracts, and several other business partners had followed suit. He'd left New York quietly, relocating to his family's estate in the Hamptons. "Thank you for being brave enough to crash my wedding," Isabella whispered as the last light faded from the sky. Alexander tightened his arms around her. "Thank you for being brave enough to say yes. Thank you so much for listening to our story of Isabella and Alexander. Love stories like theirs remind us that it's never too late to choose authenticity over expectation, courage over comfort. We hope their journey inspired you to fight for what truly matters in your own life. Please let us know in the comments where you're listening from around the world. We love connecting with our global audience and hearing how these stories resonate across different cultures and experiences. Until next time, remember that the greatest adventures begin when we're brave enough to follow our hearts.